The first light of dawn crept through my kitchen window, painting the linoleum floor in soft, grayish hues. I stood there, gripping a chipped ceramic mug, the kind you'd find in a thrift store with a faded flower pattern. The coffee inside was too cold, but I sipped it anyway, letting the bitter taste ground me. It was early, too early for most, but my mind was already tangled in the case that had haunted me for years. The disappearance of the Miller triplets in 1978. 3 kids, barely 6, gone without a trace from a small town that still whispered their names like a ghost story. I'd been a detective for decades, but this case, it clung to me, heavy as damp wool. Today, I'd promised myself to dig deeper, to find something new. Maybe it was desperation, maybe instinct, but something felt different. To continue, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. I set the mug down and shuffled to my desk, where a single lamp cast a weak glow over scattered papers. The house was quiet, save for the hum of a refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I liked it that way. Silence let me think. My fingers brushed over a worn manila folder labeled Miller Case, 1978. It was thick, stuffed with yellowed reports, grainy photos, and my own scribbled notes from years of dead ends. I'd opened it 1,000 times, but today, I hoped, would be different. The triplets, Leela, Tommy, and Grace, had vanished from their backyard on a summer evening. Their mother, Ellen, stepping inside for just a moment to answer the phone. That's all it took. No screams, no witnesses, no evidence. Just 3 empty swings swaying in the dusk. I leaned back in my chair, the wood groaning under my weight, and stared out the window. The street outside was still, the kind of quiet that only comes before the world wakes up. I imagined Ellen Miller in her own kitchen back then, maybe making tea, maybe glancing out her window too, unaware that her life was about to shatter. Loss like that, it doesn't just fade. It carves itself into you, leaves you hollow. I'd seen it in the eyes of parents before, but Ellen's story stuck with me. Maybe because I'd never had kids of my own, or maybe because I'd spent too many nights staring at those case photos. 3 identical faces, freckled, smiling, gone. My routine was slow this morning, deliberate. I mopped the kitchen floor, the mop's rhythmic swish a kind of meditation. I boiled water for tea, though I didn't drink it, just watched the steam curl upward, dissipating like a memory. These small acts kept me steady, kept the weight of the case from pulling me under. I thought about the town, too, how it had changed since '78. Back then, it was all picket fences and kids on bikes. Now, it felt heavier, like everyone carried a piece of that loss. Neighbors didn't talk as much anymore. They just nodded, their eyes skimming past each other. I'd opened it 1,000 times, but today, I hoped, would be different. The triplets, Leela, Tommy, and Grace, had vanished from their backyard on a summer evening, their mother, Ellen, stepping inside for just a moment to answer the phone. That's all it took. No screams, no witnesses, no evidence. Just 3 empty swings swaying in the dusk. I leaned back in my chair, the wood groaning under my weight, and stared out the window. The street outside was still, the kind of quiet that only comes before the world wakes up. I imagined Ellen Miller in her own kitchen back then, maybe making tea, maybe glancing out her window too, unaware that her life was about to shatter. Loss like that, it doesn't just fade. It carves itself into you, leaves you hollow. I'd seen it in the eyes of parents before, but Ellen's story stuck with me. Maybe because I'd never had kids of my own. Or maybe because I'd spent too many nights staring at those case photos. 3 identical faces, freckled, smiling, gone. My routine was slow this morning, deliberate. I mopped the kitchen floor, the mop's rhythmic swish a kind of meditation. I boiled water for tea, though I didn't drink it. Just watched the steam curl upward. The drive to my office was short, just 10 minutes through streets still half asleep, the early morning fog clinging to the pavement like a secret. I parked outside the small brick building, its faded sign reading "Private Investigations" in peeling letters. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I flicked on the light, revealing my cluttered desk, and reached for the Miller case file again. It was heavier than I remembered, not just in weight, but in what it carried. 30 years of unanswered questions about Lila, Tommy, and Grace. I settled into my chair, the leather creaking, and opened the folder, its edges frayed from too many hands. Today, I'd comb through every page, every scribbled note, looking for what I'd missed. The first document was a police report from July 17, 1978, typed on a typewriter that left smudged letters. It described the scene: a quiet backyard, a tricycle tipped over in the grass, a half-eaten apple left on a picnic table. Ellen Miller had told police she'd gone inside to answer a call, some telemarketer, she thought, though she couldn't recall the details. She was gone maybe 3 minutes. When she returned, the triplets were gone. No footprints, no tire marks, no signs of a struggle. Just that eerie stillness, like the world had paused. I lingered on her statement, her words shaky even on paper. I only looked away for a moment. That kind of guilt, it doesn't let go. I flipped to the witness interviews, thin and unhelpful. Neighbors heard nothing unusual, no screams, no cars speeding off. One woman, Mrs. Hargrove, mentioned seeing a delivery van parked nearby, but it was gone by the time police checked. No one got the license plate. I jotted a note to track down that van, though after 30 years it was probably rusting in a junkyard. My eyes caught on a grainy photo clipped to the report. The triplets' backyard. Swings motionless, the apple on the table like a taunt. I leaned closer, squinting. Something about the shadows felt off, too sharp for late afternoon. Or maybe I was seeing things, chasing ghosts in the grain. My fingers brushed over a map of the neighborhood, hand-drawn by the first detective on the case. It marked the Miller house, the surrounding streets, the wooded area nearby where police had searched for days. Nothing turned up, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing. I traced the streets with my pen, picturing the triplets running through the grass, their laughter echoing. I wondered what Ellen saw when she looked at that yard now. Did she still see her kids frozen in time, or just the emptiness they left behind? Loss like hers was a wound that never closed, only scabbed over. I sipped my coffee, now cold in its thermos, and turned to the family statements. Ellen's husband, Frank, had been at work that day, a mechanic at a garage across town. He'd come home to chaos, police lights flashing, neighbors crowding the lawn. His alibi was solid, but his words in the report were clipped, angry. I should have been there. I wondered if he still blamed himself, or if he and Ellen had found a way to carry that weight together. I made another note to ask Ellen about Frank when I saw her later. People change in 30 years, so do their stories. The office window rattled as a truck passed outside, pulling me back to the present. I checked my watch, 7:30 a.m. The town was waking up, but I felt stuck in 1978, trapped in that backyard with those empty swings. I pulled out a smaller photo, one I'd looked at too many times. The triplets at a birthday party, cake smeared on their faces, eyes bright with joy.
Lila had a gap-toothed grin, Tommy a mischievous smirk, Grace a shy tilt of her head. I set it beside my notebook, a reminder of why I kept digging. A faint noise broke my focus, a creak from the hallway. My office was on the ground floor, no one else here this early. I stood, hand on the desk, listening. Silence. Probably just the building settling, but my pulse quickened. This case had a way of making me jump at shadows. I sat back down, shaking it off, and returned to the file. There was a list of people interviewed back then. Neighbors, teachers, even the mailman. One name stood out, Clara Hensley, an elderly woman who lived across the street. Her statement was vague, something about strange folks in the neighborhood that summer. I circled her name. If she was still alive...
The drive to Ellen Miller's house took me through the heart of town, past shuttered storefronts and a diner where old men nursed coffee in silence. Her place was on the edge of the old neighborhood, a small, sagging house with peeling white paint and a front porch that leaned like it was tired. I parked under a bare oak tree, its branches scratching the sky, and sat for a moment, steeling myself. Meeting Ellen always felt like stepping into someone else's grief, like I was trespassing. But she'd agreed to talk today, and that was something. I grabbed my notebook and the photo of the triplets, tucking it into my coat pocket. The air was sharp as I stepped out, my breath visible in the early morning chill. Ellen answered the door after 2 knocks, her face pale and lined, eyes like faded glass. She was smaller than I remembered, as if 30 years of sorrow had whittled her down. "Detective," she said, her voice soft but steady, "come in." The living room smelled of lavender and dust, with a single lamp casting long shadows. Photos lined the mantel. Leela, Tommy, and Grace, frozen in time, their smiles a quiet accusation. I sat on a worn couch, the springs creaking, and she settled across from me in a rocking chair, her hands folded tight in her lap. "I keep thinking I'll see them again," she said, unprompted, staring at a spot on the floor. "Every day I wake up and forget they're gone, just for a second." Her words hung there, heavy, and I nodded, letting the silence sit. I'd learned long ago not to rush people like Ellen. Their pain set the pace. I asked about that day in 1978, gentle, like easing into cold water. She recounted it slowly, her voice a midnight murmur, the same story I'd read in the file. The phone call, the empty swings, the apple on the table. But her eyes flickered when she mentioned the backyard, like she was seeing it again. I pulled out the photo, the one from their birthday party, and set it on the coffee table. Ellen's breath caught, a small sound, barely there. "They were so happy," she whispered, her fingers brushing the edge of the image. "Leela loved to sing. Tommy was always climbing things. Grace, she'd follow them anywhere." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, out the window, where the morning light was starting to burn through the fog. I asked if she'd remembered anything new, anything she hadn't told the police back then. She shook her head, but her hands tightened in her lap, knuckles white. "There was a man," she said suddenly, her voice so low I almost missed it. "Not that day, but before, a week or 2 earlier. He came by, said he was selling encyclopedias. I didn't think much of it, but he kept looking at the kids playing in the yard." My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral, jotting it down. The original reports mentioned no salesman. "Did you tell the police?" I asked. She shook her head, eyes distant. "I didn't think it mattered. He was gone by the time it happened." Her voice trailed off, and I saw the guilt settle over her again, heavy as a winter coat. I asked for a description, but her memory was fuzzy. Tall, thin, maybe a hat, maybe not. It wasn't much, but it was something. I made a note to check for similar reports in the file, maybe cross-reference with other neighborhoods.
Ellen's gaze drifted back to the photo, and she started talking about the triplets again. Small details. How Tommy hated peas. How Grace would sleep with a stuffed rabbit. How Lila's laugh could fill a room. Each word was a thread, tying her to a past she couldn't let go. I listened, letting her fill the silence, knowing these memories were all she had left. The clock on the wall ticked past 9, its sound loud in the quiet room. I asked if she still walked the old neighborhood, if she'd noticed anything strange over the years. She shook her head, but then paused. Clara Hensley, across the street, she used to say odd things about people watching the house. I thought she was just old, confused. There was that name again, Clara. I circled it in my notebook, the same one from the case file. If Clara was still around, I'd find her next. Ellen stood, slow and stiff, and walked me to the door. "Find them," she said, not a plea but a quiet command. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Outside, the air felt colder, the fog thinner. I glanced back at the house, at the window where Ellen stood, watching me go. Her loneliness was a weight I carried with me as I drove away. The photo of the triplets still in my pocket, their faces burned into my mind.
The neighborhood around Ellen's house hadn't changed much since 1978, like it was stuck in time, holding its breath. I drove slowly, windows down, letting the crisp air sting my face. The streets were lined with modest homes, their lawns patchy, some with faded for sale signs. Kids didn't play outside anymore, not like they used to. I parked near the old Miller house, now just Ellen's, and stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel. The swings were still there in the backyard, rusted now, creaking in the breeze. I stood by the fence, picturing Leela, Tommy, and Grace running through the grass, their voices bright before they vanished. The weight of that day pressed against me, heavy and cold. I started knocking on doors, notebook in hand, asking neighbors if they remembered anything from that summer. Most were new to the area, young families who didn't know the story, their faces blank when I mentioned the triplets. But a few older folks, the ones who'd been here in '78, tightened their lips, eyes skimming past me. "Heard it was a drifter," one man muttered, leaning on his porch railing. "Or maybe the parents, you never know." His voice carried the kind of suspicion that festers in small towns where grief turns to gossip. I jotted it down, though it felt like chasing smoke. At the third house, a woman in her 60s, Mrs. Delaney, invited me in. Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon and bleach, a radio humming softly in the corner. She poured tea I didn't ask for, the cup warm against my palms. "Everyone was shaken back then," she said, stirring sugar into her own cup. "We all watched our kids closer after that, but no one saw anything." She paused, her spoon still. "Well, except maybe Clara Hensley. She was always going on about strange cars, strange people." There was Clara's name again, the third time today. I pressed her for more, but Mrs. Delaney just shrugged. "Clara's still around, you know, down on Maple Street. Might be worth a visit." I thanked her and moved on. The neighborhood waking up now, cars pulling out of driveways, a dog barking somewhere. At the next house, a man in a flannel shirt answered, his eyes narrowing when I mentioned the triplets. "Why dig it up?" he said, voice sharp. "It's been 30 years. Let it rest." I nodded, keeping my tone soft, but his words stuck with me. Some people wanted to forget, to bury the past like it never happened. But forgetting didn't bring answers. I asked about unusual activity back then, anything that stood out. He shook his head, but then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned a green van he'd seen a few times that summer. "Didn't think much of it," he said. "Delivery, maybe." I wrote it down, my mind flashing to the delivery van from the police report, the one no one followed up on. The air grew colder as I walked the block, my coat pulled tight. At the corner, I stopped by a vacant lot where kids used to play kickball. Now it's just weeds and broken glass. I imagined the triplets here, their laughter mixing with the hum of cicadas. The thought tightened my chest.
Loss wasn't just Ellen's, it was the whole town, a quiet ache that lingered in every empty yard. I knocked on a few more doors, but the answers were the same, vague memories, no hard details. One woman mentioned a strange man who'd hung around the park that summer, but she couldn't describe him. Just felt off, she said, shutting her door quickly. By noon, my notebook had a few new names and fragments: Clara, the green van, the strange man, but nothing solid. The whispers were starting to form a shape, though, like a shadow you can't quite see. I leaned against my car, staring at the Miller house across the street. The swing swayed slightly, as if touched by a ghost. I thought of Ellen, alone in that house, her life paused since that day. I'd head to Clara Hensley's next, see if her strange folks hold any weight. If she was lucid, she might have something, anything, to point me in a new direction. I climbed back into my car, the engine rumbling to life, and drove towards Maple Street, the weight of the case heavier with every mile.
Maple Street was a narrow stretch of cracked pavement, lined with sagging houses and overgrown hedges that seemed to whisper secrets. Clara Hensley's place was at the end, a squat bungalow with faded curtains and a mailbox stuffed with unopened flyers. I parked under a streetlight that flickered even in daylight, my notebook tucked under my arm. The air felt heavier here, like the street itself was holding on to 1978. I knocked on Clara's door, the wood soft under my knuckles, and waited. Footsteps shuffled inside, slow and uneven, before the door creaked open. Clara stood there, frail, her white hair a wispy halo, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You're the detective," she said, not a question, her voice like dry leaves. "Heard you were asking about the Miller kids." I nodded, introducing myself, and she waved me inside without a word. The living room was dim, cluttered with doilies and old magazines, smelling of mothballs and stale tea. She eased into an armchair, gesturing for me to sit on a couch that sagged under my weight. "I told the police back then," she started, her gaze fixed on a window where the light barely crept through. "Nobody listened, said I was imagining things." I leaned forward, pen ready, and asked what she'd seen. Her hands trembled as she clasped them, but her voice held steady. "People who didn't belong. A man, maybe two, watching the Miller house that summer. Not neighbors, not delivery." She paused, her eyes drifting to a photo on the wall. A younger Clara with a man, maybe her husband, both smiling. "My George noticed them too," she said softly. "He's gone now, but he'd seen them by the park, near the swings." My pulse quickened. This was more than the vague, strange folks from the police report. I asked for details, description, car, anything. Clara frowned, her brow creasing. "One was tall, wore a cap low, always looking down. The other, shorter, nervous, kept checking his watch. They drove a van, green, I think. Saw it parked by the alley once or twice. That green van again, the same one from the police report and the neighbor's memory." I scribbled it down, my hand moving faster now. Clara's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "The day the kids went missing, I was watering my roses. Saw that van again, just for a moment, turning the corner. Told the police, but they said it was nothing." Her eyes met mine, sharp and accusing, not at me, but at the past. "They didn't look hard enough." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The police back then had been overwhelmed, a small-town force with no experience in cases like this. Leads like Clara's got buried under panic and dead ends. I asked if she remembered anything else about the men, clothing, accents, anything distinct. She shook her head, frustrated. "It was 30 years ago. I'm old, not stupid, but time blurs things." I glanced at my notebook, the pieces starting to connect, faint as they were. The van, the men, Ellen's mention of the encyclopedia salesman. Small details, but they felt like threads pulling tighter. I asked Clara if she'd seen anyone watching her house, maybe someone who didn't want her talking.
Her laugh was brittle, like breaking glass. "I'm nobody, detective. Who'd care what I say?" But her eyes flicked to the window, and I caught a flicker of unease. She was holding something back, maybe without even knowing it. I made a note to check on her later, just in case. The clock on her mantel ticked past 1, its sound loud in the quiet room. I thanked her, leaving my card on the coffee table, and stood to go. "Be careful," she said as I reached the door, her voice low. "Some secrets don't want to be found." I nodded, stepping back into the cold. The street was empty, but I felt eyes on me, a prickle at the back of my neck. I walked to my car, glancing at the houses around me, their windows dark. Clara's story wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me moving. The green van, the men watching the Miller house, it was a lead, fragile but real. I'd head back to the office, cross-reference her account with the old reports. Maybe there's something else buried in those pages, something no one thought to chase.
The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the town as I drove to the only shop still open from 1978, a dusty general store on Main Street. Its faded sign read Hank's Goods, the kind of place that sold everything from canned peaches to fishing line. I'd heard the owner, Hank Larson, had been around back then, maybe even knew the Millers. If anyone had noticed strangers in town that summer, it'd be him. I parked outside, the bell above the door jingling as I stepped into a space that smelled of old wood and liniment. Shelves sagged under the weight of mismatched goods, and a radio crackled with a staticky country tune. Hank stood behind the counter, a wiry man in his 70s, wiping his hands on a rag. "Help ya?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I introduced myself, mentioning the Miller case, and his eyes narrowed like he was sizing me up. "Long time ago," he said, tossing the rag aside. "Why stir it up now?" I explained I was following new leads, keeping my tone soft like I was asking about the weather. He leaned on the counter, his fingers drumming. "Folks don't like talking about it. Hurts too much." I nodded, pulling out my notebook, and asked if he remembered anything unusual from that summer. Strangers, odd customers, anything out of place. He shrugged, but his eyes flicked to the window like he was checking the street. "People came and went," he said finally. "Tourists mostly. But there was this one fella, came in a few times before the kids went missing. Bought cigarettes, always paid in cash, always in a hurry." My pen paused. "What'd he look like?" I asked. Hank scratched his chin, squinting. "Tall, skinny, wore a cap pulled low. Didn't talk much, but he had a way of looking around like he was counting exits." My heart thudded. Clara's tall man with the cap, Ellen's encyclopedia salesman. I pressed for more, asking about a green van. Hank's face tightened. Might have seen one parked out back once or twice. Didn't think much of it. Delivery, I figured. I scribbled it down, the pieces clicking together, faint but sharper now. "Ever see him with anyone else?" I asked. Hank hesitated, his fingers stilling on the counter. "Once, maybe. Another guy, shorter, twitchy. They didn't come in together, but I saw them talking outside near that van." His voice dropped, like he was sharing something he shouldn't. Looked like they were arguing, but I didn't hear what about. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, though my mind was racing. Two men, a green van, circling the neighborhood before the triplets vanished. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread, and I'd pull it until it unraveled. Hank turned away, busying himself with a stack of receipts, but his movements were stiff, like he was dodging something. I asked if he'd told the police back then. "Told 'em what I knew," he said, too quick. "They didn't care about some guy buying cigarettes." His tone had an edge now, and I caught it, the kind of defensiveness that hides something. I didn't push, not yet. Instead, I asked about the Millers, if they shopped here. "Ellen came in sometimes," he said, softer now. "Nice lady. Broke my heart what happened.
She'd buy candy for those kids, always talking about 'em. His voice trailed off, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, like he wished he'd paid more attention. The store felt smaller now, the air thick with unspoken things. I thanked Hank, leaving my card, and stepped outside. The street was quiet, but I felt that prickle again, like someone was watching. I scanned the empty sidewalks, the parked cars, seeing nothing, but feeling everything. Back in my car, I flipped through my notes. The tall man, the green van, the twitchy companion. They matched Clara's story, Ellen's vague memory. But Hank's hesitation stuck with me. He knew more than he was saying, maybe something he didn't even realize was important. I'd come back to him later, when the questions weren't so fresh. The clock on my dashboard read 3 p.m. I'll head back to the office, dig into the case file again, look for mentions of a tall man or a green van. Maybe there's a report buried in there, overlooked like Clara's statement. The town was starting to feel like a puzzle, each piece jagged and hard to fit. I thought of Ellen, alone in her house, and the triplets' photo in my pocket. Their faces drove me forward, a quiet demand to keep going.
The office was colder than I'd left it, the single bulb overhead flickering as I settled at my desk. The Miller case file sat open, its pages curling at the edges, a silent challenge. Hank's words echoed in my head. The tall man, the green van, the twitchy companion. Each detail a pinprick of light in the fog of 1978. I pulled out the witness statements, a stack of faded typewritten sheets, and started reading, my eyes straining in the dim light. The words blurred sometimes, but I kept going, driven by the faces of Leela, Tommy, and Grace. Their photos sat beside me, a reminder of what was at stake. The clock ticked toward 4 p.m., the town outside settling into the quiet of late afternoon. I focused on the statements from neighbors, looking for anything that matched Clara's and Hank's accounts. Most were useless, vague recollections of a normal summer day, kids playing, cicadas humming. But one caught my eye, buried halfway down the pile. A statement from a Mr. Daniel Poole, a mailman in '78. He'd mentioned seeing a green van parked near the Miller house a few days before the disappearance, idling by the alley. Thought it was odd, he'd written. No logo, just a plain van, not local. The police hadn't followed up. It was just one line in a sea of notes. My pen circled it, hard enough to dent the paper. That van again, tying Clara, Hank, and now Poole together. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and rubbed my eyes. The van was real, not just a ghost of memory. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. Names, faces, something solid. I flipped to another statement, this one from a school teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Reed. She'd taught the triplets in kindergarten, described them as bright, inseparable. But her statement mentioned something else. A man lingering near the school playground that spring. Tall, always wearing a cap, watching the kids. Felt wrong, she'd said, but when she reported it, no one checked. Another lead ignored, another thread left dangling. My chest tightened. How many clues had slipped through the cracks? I cross-referenced the dates, the van sightings, the tall man, the school playground, all within weeks of the disappearance. It wasn't coincidence, it was a pattern, faint but there. I jotted it down, my handwriting messy with urgency. But something nagged at me, a shadow of doubt. The statements didn't align perfectly. Poole said the van was parked. Clara saw it moving. Hank's tall man was alone in the store, but with someone outside. Memory was tricky, especially after 30 years. People fill in gaps, blur details, turn hunches into facts. I had to be careful, not let desperation twist what I saw. The phone rang, sharp and jarring in the quiet. It was Ellen, her voice thin, almost breaking. "I remembered something," she said. "The salesman, the one I told you about, he had a scar, small above his eyebrow." I froze, pen hovering. None of the statements mentioned a scar. It was new, fragile, but it could narrow things down. I thanked her, told her to call if anything else came back. Her voice softened. "I keep seeing them, Detective. In my dreams, they're still 6. I swallowed, promising to keep her updated, and hung up, the silence heavier now. I turned back to the file, pulling out a map of the neighborhood. I marked the van sightings, Clara's alley, Pool's street corner, Hank's store. They formed a loose circle around the Miller house, like a noose tightening. My fingers tapped the desk, restless. The tall man with the scar, the green van, the twitchy companion, they were pieces, but not the whole picture. I thought of Clara's warning. Some secrets don't want to be found. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't stop now. The triplets deserved better than a cold case file. Outside, the sky was turning gray, the kind of dusk that swallows details. I stood, stretching my stiff back, and glanced at the window. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across the glass, but when I looked again, it was gone. Just my mind, I told myself, playing tricks. Still, I locked the office door before sitting back down. I'd keep digging, cross-check every statement, every sighting. Tomorrow, I'd track down Daniel Poole, if he was still alive, and revisit Hank. Something wasn't right with his story, the way he'd hesitated. The truth was out there, buried in the cracks of this town, and I'd find it, even if it took all night.
The office felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the last of the daylight bled out of the sky. I sat hunched over the Miller case file, the lamp casting a harsh glow on the papers scattered across my desk. The triplets' photos stared up at me, their smiles a quiet demand to keep going. Clara's words, Hank's hesitation, Ellen's scar, they swirled in my mind, fragments of a puzzle I couldn't quite piece together. My fingers flipped through the file, searching for something I'd missed, when a small envelope slipped out, tucked between 2 reports. It was unmarked, sealed, and brittle with age. My pulse quickened as I opened it, careful not to tear the yellowed paper. Inside was a single photograph, creased and faded, showing a green van parked near a wooded area. No date, no note, just the van, its side plain, no logo, just like Poole's description. I turned the photo over, hoping for a clue, but the back was blank. My eyes traced the image again, the van's rear door slightly ajar, a shadow inside, too vague to make out. It wasn't in the main file, not cataloged with the other evidence. How had it been overlooked? I set it beside the triplets' photo, the contrast jarring, their bright faces, the van's ominous blur. This was something new, something that tied the threads together. Clara's alley, Hank's store, Poole's corner. The van was real, and someone had wanted this photo hidden. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and rubbed my temples. The clock read 6 p.m., the town outside sinking into night. I dug deeper into the file, looking for any mention of the van or the wooded area. A report from a week after the disappearance caught my eye. A search party had combed the woods near the Miller house, finding nothing but a child's shoe, too worn to confirm it was one of the triplets. The report dismissed it, but I marked the location on my map, a half-mile from where the van was photographed. My mind raced. Had the police missed something there, too? I thought of Ellen, her voice on the phone, the scar she'd remembered. The tall man with the cap, the van, the woods. They were connected. I could feel it, like a knot tightening in my chest. A noise outside snapped me out of my thoughts, a low scrape, like footsteps on gravel. I froze, listening. The office was on a quiet street, no one around this late. I stood, moving to the window, and peered through the blinds. The parking lot was empty, my car alone under the streetlight. But that prickle was back, the same one I'd felt at Clara's. I locked the door again, double-checking it, and sat back down, my hand brushing the photo of the van. It felt like a warning, though from who, I couldn't say. I jotted a note to check the woods tomorrow, maybe walk the area myself. If that shoe was still in evidence, I'd look at it too. I turned back to the file, pulling out witness statements again. One from a gas station attendant mentioned a tall man buying cigarettes in July '78, just days before the triplets vanished. He'd described a scar above the man's eyebrow, faint but noticeable. My breath caught. Ellen's salesman. The attendant hadn't mentioned a van, but he'd noted the man was jumpy, always looking over his shoulder. I circled the statement, my pen shaking slightly. This was no coincidence. The tall man was real, and he'd been everywhere. Hank's store, the school, the Miller house. But who was he, and where was he now? The phone rang, shrill in the silence, and I flinched. It was Clara, her voice trembling. "Someone was outside my house just now," she whispered, "walking slow, by the fence. I saw them from my window." I told her to lock her doors, stay calm, and I'd check on her soon. Her fear was real, and it mirrored mine. Someone didn't want this case reopened. I hung up, my mind spinning. The van, the scar, the woods, Clara's prowler, it was all closing in, like the town itself was holding its breath. I grabbed my coat, slipping the photo of the van into my pocket next to the triplets. I'd drive to Clara's, make sure she was safe, then head to the woods at first light. The truth was out there, and it was closer than it had ever been.
The night air bit at my knuckles as I drove to Clara Hensley's house, the town now cloaked in a darkness that felt too heavy for 7 p.m. Her call had rattled me. Someone lurking by her fence, slow and deliberate, wasn't just a coincidence. Not with the photo of the green van burning a hole in my pocket, not with the threads of 1978 pulling tighter. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was on that van, the tall man with the scar, and the shadow Clara saw. The streets were empty, the only sound the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. I gripped the wheel, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Clara's street was dark, the streetlight still flickering like it had earlier. I parked a few houses down, scanning the area before stepping out. Her bungalow looked smaller at night, its windows glowing faintly behind those faded curtains. I knocked softly, not wanting to startle her. She opened the door a crack, her eyes wide, a kitchen knife in her trembling hand. "It's just me," I said, keeping my voice low, like we were sharing a secret. She let me in, locking the door behind me, and I noticed the way her hands shook as she set the knife on the table. The air smelled of mothballs and fear. "He was out there," she said, pointing to the window facing the backyard. Tall, moving slow, like he was looking for something. I asked if she saw his face, but she shook her head. Too dark, just a shape, but it wasn't right. Her voice was a whisper, the kind you use at midnight when the world feels too quiet. I checked the backyard through the window, seeing nothing but shadows and the outline of her rose bushes. Still, I believed her. Clara wasn't the type to jump at ghosts. I told her to keep the lights low, stay inside, and call me if she saw anything else. She nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was back in 1978, watching that green van turn the corner. I stepped outside, my flashlight cutting through the dark as I walked the perimeter of her house. The fence was old, wooden, sagging in places, but I found no footprints, no signs of anyone. Just the wind, cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. I stood by the alley where Clara had seen the van all those years ago, picturing it idling there, its rear door ajar like in the photo. My hand brushed the picture in my pocket, next to the triplets. The connection was there, but it was slippery, like trying to hold water. I needed more. Back in my car, I decided to drive by Hank's store again. His hesitation earlier, the way his eyes flicked away when I mentioned the van, hadn't sat right. The shop was closed now, the windows dark, but a light glowed in the back, probably his office. I parked across the street, watching. A shadow moved inside, then stopped. My pulse quickened. I didn't plan to confront him tonight, but something pulled me out of the car, my boots quiet on the pavement. I knocked on the glass door, the sound sharp in the silence. No answer. I knocked again, louder, and the shadow froze. The door cracked open, and Hank's face appeared, pale and tense. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice sharper than before. I kept my tone even, saying I had more questions about the tall man, the van. His jaw tightened, and he glanced over his shoulder like someone else was there. "Told you all I know," he said, but his hands were fidgety, twisting the rag he held. I pushed, asking if he'd seen anyone lurking tonight, maybe near Clara's. His eyes widened just for a second before he muttered, "No idea what you're talking about." But he stepped back, his body blocking the doorway, and I caught a glimpse of something behind him, a stack of old boxes, one marked 1978. I didn't call him on it yet. Instead, I thanked him, my voice calm, and walked away, feeling his stare on my back. The street was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides things. I drove off, my mind racing. Hank knew something, maybe about the van, maybe about the man with the scar. And someone was watching Clara, maybe watching me. The case was waking up, and so was the town's unease. I'd check those boxes tomorrow, find a way to get Hank talking. For now, I headed home, the triplets' photo heavy in my pocket, their faces urging me on. The road back to my house was a blur of streetlights and shadows, the night pressing against my windshield like a warning. Hank's tense face, Clara's trembling voice, and that unmarked photo of the green van churned in my mind, each piece sharpening the edge of the Miller case. It was past 8 p.m., the town sunk deep into darkness, but sleep was a distant thought. I pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The triplets' photo was still in my pocket, next to the van's, their weight a quiet reminder of why I couldn't stop. But something felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stepped out, my boots heavy on the ground, and scanned the street. Nothing moved, but that prickle was back, crawling up my neck. I unlocked my front door, the familiar creak of the hinges too loud in the silence. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights, letting the faint glow from a neighbor's porch filter through my windows. I set my notebook and the photos on the kitchen table, the van's image stark under the dim light. I was about to pour a glass of water when I heard it, a soft thud from the backyard, like a foot catching on a root. My hand froze on the faucet. I grabbed my flashlight and a small pistol I kept in a locked drawer, its weight cold and steady in my hand. I hadn't needed it in years, but tonight, with Clara's prowler and Hank's evasions, I wasn't taking chances. I slipped out the back door, keeping low, the flashlight off for now. The yard was dark, the outline of my shed barely visible. I listened, heart pounding, but heard only the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then another sound, a low scrape, metal on metal, near the fence. I clicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the night, and caught a glimpse of movement, a figure, tall, darting behind the shed. "Stop," I called, my voice sharper than I meant, the gun raised but steady. The figure didn't answer, just bolted toward the alley, footsteps heavy on the grass. I gave chase, my boots slipping on the damp ground, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The figure was fast, too fast, disappearing into the shadows before I could close the distance. I reached the alley, panting, and swept the light across it. Empty, just a stretch of cracked pavement and overgrown weeds. My chest tightened, not from the run, but from the realization someone was watching, and they weren't just curious. I doubled back to the yard, checking the shed. The lock was scratched, fresh marks glinting in the light, like someone had tried to pry it open. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. Someone wanted me to back off. I thought of Clara, her knife trembling in her hand, and Hank guarding those boxes marked 1978. The case was stirring something, and it wasn't just memories. I went back inside, locking every door, and sat at the table, the gun beside the photos. My hands shook as I opened my notebook, writing down what I'd seen.
Tall figure, fast, alley escape. It matched Clara's prowler, maybe even the tall man from 78. I called the local police, my voice calm but low, reporting the incident without mentioning the case. They promised to patrol the area, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. This was personal, tied to the triplets, to the van, to the scar. I looked at the van's photo again, its rear door ajar, that shadow inside. Was it the tall man, his twitchy companion, or someone else, someone who'd stayed hidden all these years? My mind flashed to Ellen, alone in her house, and I wondered if she was safe. I'll check on her tomorrow, after I search the woods. The clock ticked past 9 p.m., each second heavy. I didn't sleep, just sat there, the gun within reach, the triplets' faces staring up from the table. I thought of their laughter, their swings, the apple left behind. This case wasn't just a file anymore, it was a pulse, alive and dangerous. Whoever was out there, they knew I was getting close. I'll rethink my approach, move carefully now, talk to the police, revisit Hank, maybe even get Clara somewhere safe. The truth was out there, but it was fighting to stay buried.
The night stretched on, my kitchen table a battlefield of papers and half-drunk coffee, the gun still within reach. The triplets' photo and the vans sat side by side, their edges curling in the damp air. The chase in my backyard had left me rattled, but it sharpened my focus like a blade honed by fear. Whoever was out there didn't want me digging, and that meant I was close. By 10 p.m., I'd made up my mind. I needed the police, not just for a patrol, but for real help. The Miller case was too big for me alone now, with prowlers and scratched locks creeping into the present. I dialed the station, asking for Detective Sarah Klein, someone I'd worked with before, tough but fair. She agreed to meet me at the station in 20 minutes. The police station was a squat brick building, its fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped flies. Sarah greeted me with a nod, her face lined from too many late nights. I spread the case file across a conference table, the photos, my notes, the van's image stark under the harsh light. "This isn't just a cold case anymore," I said, my voice low, steady, but carrying the weight of the night. I told her about Clara's prowler, Hank's hesitation, the figure in my yard, the gun I'd held just hours ago. Her eyes narrowed when I showed her the van's photo, its unmarked side and open door. "Why wasn't this logged?" she asked, flipping it over. I shook my head. Someone had buried it, maybe on purpose. Sarah pulled the original 1978 reports, cross-referencing them with my notes. She found the same gaps I had. The green van mentioned by Poole, ignored. The tall man with the scar, dismissed. Clara's statement brushed off as an old woman's ramblings. "Sloppy work," she muttered, her pen tapping the table. But then she paused, pulling a thin file I hadn't seen before, marked supplementary evidence. Inside was a report from a retired officer, dated a month after the disappearance. He'd interviewed a gas station owner on the edge of town who'd seen a green van speeding out of the county the night the triplets vanished. The driver was tall, wore a cap, had a scar above his eyebrow. My breath caught. Ellen's salesman, Hank's customer, now tied to the van's escape. "This never made it to the main file," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Someone dropped the ball or didn't want it followed." She promised to dig into it, check old vehicle records, maybe even pull prints from the van's photo if it wasn't too degraded. I nodded, grateful but uneasy. The police back then had missed so much. Clara's men, the shoe in the woods, now this. I told Sarah about the woods, the shoe mentioned in the search report, and my plan to check it tomorrow. She offered to send an officer with me, but I shook my head. "I need to see it alone first," I said. "But keep an eye on Clara Hensley. She's scared." Sarah leaned back, her chair creaking. "You're stirring something, you know that, right?" I nodded, thinking of the shadow behind my shed, the scratches on the lock. She promised to run the scar description through their database, see if any old records matched.
"And Hank," I added, "he's hiding something. Those boxes in his store marked 1978 might be worth a look." Sarah raised an eyebrow but jotted it down. "I'll get a warrant if we need one," she said. "But you be careful. Whoever's watching you, they're not playing." I left the station just before midnight, the town silent except for the hum of streetlights. My car felt like a sanctuary, but I checked the back seat before getting in, the gun still heavy in my coat. Driving home, I thought of Ellen, alone with her ghosts, and Clara clutching her knife. The lead from the gas station report was solid, our tall man, scarred, driving the van out of town that night. It wasn't proof, but it was a direction, a path through the fog. I'd walk the woods tomorrow, look for anything the search party missed, then press Hank harder. Sarah's help gave me leverage, but the danger was real now, a shadow moving closer. I parked in my driveway, scanning the yard before going inside. The triplets' faces stayed with me, urging me forward, even as the night grew heavier.
The night had turned colder, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and stays there. I didn't sleep, just sat at my kitchen table, the gun within reach, the triplets' photo staring up at me beside the vans. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., each second a reminder that time was slipping, but the case was alive now, pulsing with new leads. Sarah's discovery, the gas station report tying the tall man with the scar to the green van speeding out of town, had cracked something open. But the figure in my yard, the scratches on my shed, Clara's prowler, they were warnings, shadows circling closer. I needed to move fast, but carefully, like stepping through a minefield. The woods were next, but something told me to check on Hank again, sooner rather than later. I drove back to Main Street, the town a ghost under the sodium glow of streetlights. Hank's store was dark, but that light in the back still flickered, like it had last night. I parked a block away, not wanting to announce myself, and walked, my boots soft on the pavement. The air smelled of rain, the kind that washes away evidence. I didn't knock this time, just stood by the side window, peering through a gap in the blinds. Hank was there, hunched over a desk, sorting through papers from one of those boxes marked 1978. My pulse quickened. He wasn't just tidying up, he was looking for something, his movements quick, almost frantic. I tapped the glass, sharp enough to startle him. He froze, then turned, his face pale in the dim light. "What the hell?" he mouthed, crossing to the door. He opened it a crack, his eyes darting past me to the street. "You can't keep showing up like this," he hissed, but I stepped closer, keeping my voice low, steady, like I was calming a nervous dog. "What's in the boxes, Hank?" I asked, nodding toward the back. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he'd slam the door. Instead, he stepped aside, letting me in. The store smelled of dust and old leather, the air thick with secrets. He led me to the back, where a single bulb hung over a cluttered desk. The box was open, papers spilling out, receipts, invoices, a few faded photos. "Just old records," he said, too quick, his hands shoving papers back into the box. But I caught a glimpse of something, a Polaroid of a green van parked behind the store, a man standing beside it, tall, cap low, a faint scar above his eyebrow. My heart thudded. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing, keeping my voice neutral. Hank's face went white, his hands freezing. "Nobody," he stammered, "just some guy, years ago." But his eyes betrayed him, flicking to the door like he expected someone to burst through. I pressed, slow and deliberate, asking about the man, the van, the summer of '78. Hank's story unraveled, his words tripping over each other. He came in a few times, okay, bought cigarettes, talked about the weather, said his name was Ray, I think, Ray Carter. The name hit like a spark. No Ray Carter was in the case file, but it was a lead, solid and new.
I asked if Ray had a partner, someone twitchy like he'd described before. Hank nodded, reluctant. Yeah, a guy named Eddie. Didn't know his last name. They argued a lot outside by the van. I scribbled it down, my hand steady despite the adrenaline. Then Hank's voice dropped, barely a whisper. I saw them that night, Detective. The night the kids went missing, driving out of town, fast, toward the highway. He looked away, shame creeping into his eyes. I didn't tell the police, thought it didn't matter. I stared at him, the weight of his silence heavy. 30 years, and he'd held on to this, letting Ellen and the town drown in grief. I wanted to shake him, but I kept my voice soft, asking why he'd stayed quiet. Scared, he admitted. Ray, he had a look, like he'd hurt anyone who talked. That explained the boxes, the late-night sorting. Hank was covering his tracks, or maybe looking for proof to clear his conscience. I took the Polaroid, slipping it into my pocket with the others. You're telling the police this, I said, not a request. He nodded, defeated, and I left, the night colder now, the air sharp with the promise of rain. Ray Carter, Eddie, the van speeding out of town. It was the break I'd been chasing. But the figure in my yard, the scratches, Clara's fear, they meant Ray, or someone tied to him, was still here, watching. I'd call Sarah, get her to bring Hank in, check on Clara.
The night had grown thick, the kind of dark that swallows sound and sharpens every creak. I drove home from Hank's store, the Polaroid of the green van and the tall man, Ray Carter, burning in my pocket alongside the Triplets photo. It was past 2 a.m., the town silent except for the faint hum of my engine. Hank's confession had cracked the case open. Ray and Eddie speeding out of town the night Leela, Tommy, and Grace vanished. But his fear, his years of silence, told me this wasn't over. Someone was still watching. Clara's prowler, the figure in my yard. The truth was close, but it felt like a trap tightening around me. I needed to slow down, think, piece it together before I walked into something I couldn't walk out of. Back home, I locked the doors and spread my notes across the kitchen table, the gun still nearby, its weight a cold comfort. The Triplets' photo sat at the center, their smiles a quiet anchor. I traced the threads. Ray Carter, tall, scarred, seen at Hank's, the school, Ellen's house. Eddie, twitchy, his shadow in the van's photo, arguing with Ray. The green van, circling the neighborhood, speeding away that night. Clara's fear, Hank's guilt, the shoe in the woods. They all pointed to something deliberate, planned, not a random act. I sipped cold coffee, the bitter taste grounding me, and stared at the map I'd marked. The van sightings, the woods, the Miller house. It was a web, and Ray was at its center. I thought of Ellen, alone in her house, and wondered if she'd ever suspected someone like Ray. Her mention of the salesman's scar matched Hank's Polaroid, the gas station report. But why the Triplets? Why her kids? I jotted questions. Was Ray local? Did he know the Millers? What was Eddie's role? The shoe in the woods nagged at me, too worn to be the Triplets, but maybe a clue to where they'd been taken. I'd check the evidence log with Sarah, see if it was still in storage. The woods were my next step, at first light, to look for anything the search party missed. A noise outside, a soft crunch, like a twig snapping, jerked me upright. I grabbed the gun, my heart thudding, and moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The yard was empty, the shed's silhouette stark against the moonless sky. But I didn't trust the quiet. I checked the locks again, my flashlight sweeping the corners of the house. Nothing. Just my nerves, stretched thin by the day's weight. I sat back down, forcing myself to breathe. Clara's warning echoed. Some secrets don't want to be found.
Ray Carter, or someone tied to him, was out there, guarding those secrets with scratches on locks and shadows in alleys. I pulled out the van's photo, the one from the case file, and compared it to Hank's Polaroid. The angles were different, but the van was the same, plain, green, no logo. The shadow in the first photo was clearer in Hank's. A man, not Ray, shorter, maybe Eddie. I wrote their names in my notebook, circling them. Sarah would run Ray Carter through the database, maybe find an old arrest, an address. If Eddie was still around, he might talk, especially if he was the nervous one. I thought of Hank sorting those boxes in the dark, his fear palpable. He'd held on to that Polaroid for 30 years, too scared to speak. What else was he hiding? The clock read 3 a.m., the house creaking as it settled. I leaned back, my eyes burning from staring at papers. The Triplets' photos kept me going, their laughter a memory I'd never heard but felt. I couldn't rush this, not with someone watching, waiting for me to slip. Tomorrow, I'd meet Sarah, get Hank to the station, check on Clara. Then the woods, slow and careful, looking for anything, a scrap, a mark, a trace of 1978. The case was no longer cold. It was alive, dangerous, demanding. I closed my notebook, the sound soft but final, and sat in the dark, listening to the night, waiting for dawn to break the silence.
The first hint of dawn crept through my kitchen window, a pale gray that softened the edges of the night's tension. I hadn't slept, my eyes gritty. The Triplets' photo and the van's Polaroid still spread across the table. The gun sat nearby, a cold reminder of the figure in my yard, the scratches on my shed. Hank's confession about Ray Carter and Eddie, the green van speeding away in 1978, had brought me closer to the truth, but it also brought danger closer. I sipped the last of my coffee, now cold and bitter, and thought of Ellen Miller. Her grief, her fleeting memory of the scarred salesman, had started this unraveling. Today, I'd walk the woods, check on Clara, and meet Sarah at the station. But first, I needed to see Ellen again. Her pain deserved answers, and I was starting to believe she might find some peace. I drove to Ellen's house, the town stirring slowly under a heavy sky. Her porch light was on, a faint beacon in the early morning fog. She answered my knock quickly, her face drawn, as if she hadn't slept either. "Any news?" she asked, her voice a whisper, like she was afraid to hope. I stepped inside, the lavender and dust smell of her living room familiar now. I told her about the van, Ray Carter, the scar, careful not to promise too much, but enough to show I was close. Her eyes widened, her hands twisting together. "That's him," she said, her voice breaking. "The salesman. I knew he wasn't right." I nodded, jotting it down, and asked if she remembered anything else about him, his voice, his clothes, anything. She shook her head, her gaze drifting to the mantel, to the Triplets' photos. "I just see them," she said. "Leela singing, Tommy climbing, Grace following." I showed her Hank's Polaroid, the van and the scarred man. Her breath caught, a small sound, and she nodded. "That's the van. I saw it once, down the street. Before." Her voice trailed off, and I saw the weight of 30 years settle over her again. But there was something new in her eyes, a flicker of resolve, like she was ready to face whatever came next. I promised to keep her updated, told her to lock her doors, and left, the morning air sharp against my face. Her strength, fragile but real, stayed with me as I drove to the woods. The wooded area near the Miller house was dense, a tangle of pines and underbrush, untouched since the '78 search. I parked at the edge, my flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other. The ground was soft, damp from last night's threat of rain, and I moved slowly, eyes scanning for anything, a scrap of fabric, a mark, the shoe from the report.
The air smelled of pine and earth, the silence broken only by a distant bird. I found the spot marked in the old search report, a clearing where the shoe had been found. Nothing was there now, just moss and fallen needles. But I knelt, sifting through the dirt. My fingers brushed something hard, a small rusted buckle, the kind from a child's shoe. My heart thudded. It wasn't proof, but it was something, a whisper from 1978. I bagged the buckle, my hand steady despite the chill running through me. Back at my car, I called Sarah, telling her about the buckle, Hank's Polaroid, Ellen's confirmation. She was already at the station, running Ray Carter's name. "Got a hit," she said, her voice tight. "Raymond Carter, arrested in '79 for petty theft, lived an hour from here. Scar on his record, matches the description. No trace of an Eddie yet." I asked her to check for any connection to the Millers, maybe a job, a grudge. She promised to dig deeper and bring Hank in for questioning. "And the woods," I added. "We need to search again, properly." She agreed, saying she'd send a team tomorrow. Driving back, I thought of Ellen, the buckle, the van. The truth was painful but clear. Ray had taken the triplets, likely with Eddie, and the van was their escape. Why, I didn't know yet, but the buckle was a step toward closure. Ellen's face, her flicker of resolve, stayed with me. She was healing, slowly, as the pieces came together. I'd check on Clara next, then meet Sarah. The case was breaking open, and with it, a chance for the town to breathe again.
The day was fading, the sky a bruised purple as I drove to Clara Hensley's house, the rusted buckle from the woods heavy in my pocket. The triplets' photo and the van's Polaroid sat on the passenger seat, their edges worn from my constant handling. Ellen's quiet strength, Sarah's lead on Ray Carter, and Hank's confession had woven a fragile net around the truth, but it wasn't enough, not yet. Clara's fear, the prowler outside her house, lingered like a shadow, and I needed to make sure she was safe before meeting Sarah at the station. The clock read 6:30 p.m., the town settling into a stillness that felt both peaceful and heavy, like it was waiting for the case to finally rest. Clara answered her door slowly, her eyes sharp but tired, the kitchen knife nowhere in sight. "You're back," she said, her voice soft, like she'd been expecting me. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of mothballs wrapping around me, and told her about the buckle, Ray Carter, the van. Her hands trembled as she sat, but she nodded, her gaze steady. "I knew I saw something," she whispered. "That van, those men, they took those kids." I asked if she'd seen anyone lurking since last night. She shook her head, but her eyes flicked to the window. "Not tonight," she said, "but I feel them, detective, watching." I promised to have the police patrol her street, and she gave me a small, grateful nod. I drove to the station, the buckle, photos, and my notebook in hand. Sarah was waiting, her desk cluttered with files. She'd found more on Ray Carter. He'd lived in a nearby town until 80, then vanished. No death record, no forwarding address. Eddie, though, was a ghost. No last name, no trace. But Sarah had pulled a new lead. A storage unit linked to Ray, abandoned in 81, its contents auctioned off. Among them, a child's jacket, blue, like one Grace Miller wore. My chest tightened. It wasn't proof, but it was close. "We're searching the woods tomorrow," Sarah said, "and Hank's coming in. He's scared, but he'll talk." We sat late into the night, piecing it together. Ray, the tall man with the scar, had planned it, watched the triplets, used the van, maybe with Eddie's help. Why? We didn't know. A grudge? A debt? Something personal with the Millers? The jacket, the buckle, the van's escape. They pointed to abduction, not a random act. I thought of Ellen, her resolve hardening, and Clara, her fear easing as the truth surfaced. The town's wound was reopening, but maybe to heal this time. I left the station near midnight,
exhausted but steady, the triplets' faces still driving me. I stopped by Ellen's house one last time, the porch light a faint glow. She didn't answer, but I saw her through the window, sitting by the mantel, staring at the triplets' photos. I didn't knock, just stood there, feeling her grief and her hope mingle. The buckle in my pocket felt like a promise, to her, to Leela, Tommy, and Grace. I drove home, the town quiet, the stars sharp above. The case wasn't solved, not fully, but it was close. Ray was out there, or his secrets were, and I'd find them. For now, Ellen could start to heal, Clara could sleep easier, and the town could begin to let go. As I sit here now, the night soft and still, the weight of the Miller case feels lighter, though not gone. The buckle, the van, Ray Carter's name, they're pieces of a truth that's finally taking shape, a truth that might give Ellen a chance to breathe, to see her children's faces without breaking. I see them too, Lila's laugh, Tommy's mischief, Grace's shy smile, not just in photos, but in the quiet spaces of this town. The woods will tell us more tomorrow, and Hank's words, Sarah's leads, will guide us closer. The pain of 1978 won't vanish, but it's softening, like a wound beginning to scar. I'll keep going, for the triplets, for Ellen, for the neighbors who still whisper their names. The truth is near, a gentle light in the dark, and I'll carry it forward, step by careful step, until the shadows fade.